Good morning, Math 9. Today our lesson is going to be solving two-step equations. So very similar to last day's lesson, but this time it will take us 2 steps in order to solve the question. So remember, when we're solving, we want to keep the variable on one side and everything else on the opposite. So I'm going to do 4 examples and 2 word problems with you. The first example is a review of something you should have done last year. So 2x plus 3 is equal to 9. So my first step is to minus 3 on this side because you get rid of the constant first. So you have to minus 3 on the opposite side. So I'm left with 2x is equal to 6. Okay. Now I want to get rid of the coefficient. So in order for me to get rid of the coefficient, I divide by 2. I divide by 2. So my x is equal to 3. So for this particular question, my x is equal to 3. You saw these types of questions in grade 8. We will make them a little bit harder, but that's our first example. Our second example is I can make these harder by adding decimals. So question number 2. I have r is over 1.2 plus 1.5, which is equal to 3. Same thing here. You always move your constant first, so the number that's on its own. My first step is to bring the 1.5 to the opposite side. And how do I do that? I take away 1.5, so I take away 1.5. That cancels out, so I'm left with r over 1.2, which is equal to 1.5. So my first step was to move the constant. My second step is to multiply with the 1.2 because it's r divided by 1.2. So I multiply this side by 1.2. That will cancel. So I have to multiply this side by 1.2. So my r is going to be equal to 1.5 times 1.2, which gives me 1.8. And that is my final answer for question number 2. Okay. Now we're going to get into a little bit tougher questions. Question number 3. I have 4x plus 2/5 is equal to negative 2/3. So in this particular question, my first step is to take away my constant. The only difference is my constant is a fraction. So I take away 2.5 on this side. It'll cancel out. But I have to also take it away on this side. So it's going to be 4x is equal to negative 2/3 minus 2/5. Okay? And remember, when we minus fractions, we need to have a common denominator. So my common denominator in this case is going to be 15. So I want to change this to 15. I did that by multiplying by 5. So I have to also multiply this by 5, which gives me 10. I got to change that to 15, so I multiply by 3. That gives me 15. But I also multiply this by 3, which gives me 6. So now my question becomes 4x is equal to, and remember, when you're subtracting, I work with the top numbers. Negative 10 minus 6, which gives me negative 16. And the denominator stays the same. Once we've done that, I want to get x by itself. So I divide this side by 4. So I have to divide this side by 4. And remember, when we divide fractions, we always multiply. The first fraction stays the same. Division becomes a multiplication, and you flip your fraction. So it becomes 1 over 4. So if I multiply this together now, I end up with x is equal to, multiply top numbers, which gives me negative 16, multiply bottom numbers, which gives me 60. And then you have to put it into lowest terms. So I get negative 16 over 60. I can divide it by 4. So my final answer is going to be negative 4 over 15. That is my final answer. You cannot work in decimals. If a fraction is given to you, your final answer has to be in a fraction. A second way we can do the same question is to find the lowest common denominators. I really suggest you learn this method. It will make your life easier. So I'm going to go through it in detail for the next two examples. So in this question, I look at my denominators, which are 5 and 3. So my lowest common denominator is 15. Once I find that, I want to multiply every single term by 15. It gets a little bit of getting used to, but once you're used to it, it'll make your life easier. So now I do the math. 15 times 4 gives me 60x plus 15 times 2 is 30. 30 divided by 5 is 6. 15 times negative 2 is negative 30. Negative 30 divided by 3 gets me negative 10. So I took a complicated fraction question and I made it nice and simple, just like I learned it in grade 8. Now I take away 6. I take away 6. I have 60x is equal to negative 16. I divide by 60. I divide by 60. So my x is equal to negative 16 over 60. But I want it into lowest terms, so I divide by 4. So I get negative 4 over 15. I get the same answer, but a lot quicker, and the math becomes easier once I get rid of my fractions. Last example, which is example 4. If I look at this question, I have a 3, 4, 3 in my denominator's position. So my first step is to come up with an LCD, which is 12. So I'm going to multiply every single term by 12. Okay, 12 times x divided by 3 leaves me with 4x. 12 times 3 is 36. 36 divided by 4 leaves me with 9. 12 times negative 2 is negative 24. Negative 24 divided by 3 gives me 8. Now I add 9. I add 9. That cancels, which gives me 4x is equal to 17. I divide by 4. And my answer is x is equal to 17 over 4. So my final answer is x is equal to 17 over 4.